Our interview for today is Professor Kyle Smith. Professor Kyle Smith obtained his bachelor's and PhD from Purdue in 2007 and 2012 respectively. He was then a postdoc at MIT. He joined UIUC as an assistant professor in 2014. His research areas span the domains of applied physics, chemistry, energy, fluid mechanics, and computation and applied math. Let's hear more from him. Joy, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Hello, Professor. Welcome to Coffee Hour, and actually welcome to Birck again.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the warm and thoughtful welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So now you're a young faculty in UIUC, and it has been like 7 years since you left Purdue. But if we're tracing back from your childhood, when you first have like a contents with science or engineering, that's an even long time. So what do you think you would like to do as your career when you were a child?
Wow. I really appreciate, let me just say again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Before I answer that question, my time at Purdue was a very formative time in my life. I spent 10 years at Purdue, and to be able to come back and spend time with new students there, as well as folks that I know from my time there, it really is a joy for me. So thank you again. And I was impressed by the list of questions that were sent because I felt like, wow, this is an opportunity for me to reflect on my whole life, actually, which is honestly not something I always find myself doing, but I think it's actually a really healthy thing to do. And you know, one thing that I would emphasize, broadly speaking, is that so many of the things that I thought when I was young, very young, I would never have expected to be doing what I'm doing now, and I'm so thankful that doors have opened up for me, and a common theme has been that people have come into my life and given me opportunities or encouraged me or mentored me to do something, to try something that I never thought of. And I think that throughout, one attribute of mine that has benefited me is that I've just had an openness to explore things that I was previously not familiar with. But you know, getting back to your question, Yuhang, about my childhood, I think I had a pretty unique childhood. My father is actually an inventor himself. He doesn't have a degree of any sort, but he invented and also manufactured parts for drag racing engines. He designed something called a cylinder head, which I think anyone here who's familiar with cars or combustion engines knows what a cylinder head is. Well, he designed those things for racing. And I was around all that stuff, around drag racing, even from a very young age, around loud noises and welding apparatuses, and was always tinkering with things with my hands, and I think that had a big influence on me as I was a child. But I honestly didn't really have any career ambitions for quite a long time, I would say. I think as a child, I have memories going back contemplating whether I would even be living by the age of 25. Because I just couldn't, my mind couldn't wrap my head around what would it even be like to get out of high school. I thought that for a long time, but fortunately, I got through that phase of my life. So anyway, I'll let you ask the next question.
So it sounds like it's not easy, like childhood going to where you are now. And when do you realize that you would like to go into physics or engineering?
I think during high school, I realized that I enjoyed mathematics a lot. And also, I had this hands-on experience with mechanical kinds of things, especially with cars. My dad and I actually converted a 1984 Mercury Capri, which I think maybe few people on the call even know that Mercury was a make of a vehicle. It was under the Ford brand. I'm not sure if it's still around, but we had a Mercury Capri, which we converted to a Cobra Mustang. Anyway, did a lot of hands-on things with that, liked math a lot. And I think I really like to think about problems in a very visual way. My mode of thinking often is very visual. I see pictures, and that's how I often understand concepts. And all those things kind of appeal to the engineering track. And so when I was looking for colleges, ultimately, those are the kind of programs that I look for. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's kind of like the childhood for mechanical engineering. So then you start your journey in Purdue, and did you realize that you would like to be a faculty or a PhD after like your undergraduate at that time?
That's a good question. So there is a whole lot that I could say about my undergraduate time. And firstly, I would say that going into undergraduate, I can remember in the first 6 weeks of undergraduate, as in the general engineering program at Purdue, I wasn't even sure if I could get past the first 6 weeks. I actually really feel like this is an opportunity for me to show the human side of what might be perceived as successful people actually experience. In that first 6 weeks that I was at Purdue, I have a memory that sticks in my head where I was standing in front of the undergraduate library on what I believe is State Street, and I was standing across from the Wesley Foundation talking to my dad on the phone, and I was ready to jump in front of a car and say, I'm done with this, because
Wow.
I'm worthless. I can't handle this. That was a huge turning point for me. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, and I believe that God used that experience in my life to redirect me. And I decided after that I wanted to basically do what I had opportunities to do at Purdue by the grace of God, and to trust Him. And and so, when I think about how did I ever end up on this track to become a faculty member, I just see God opening up doors for me along the way that I never anticipated. I ended up finding out about a potential opportunity to do undergraduate research with Tim Fisher, who now is at UCLA. He used to be a professor in mechanical at Purdue. He was my ME 200 thermodynamics professor, and I reached out to him at some point and asked, do you have an opportunity to do undergraduate research? And he took me right in. I ended up doing the SURF program at Purdue for a summer, working out at Zucro Lab, working on hydrogen storage for fuel cell vehicles. And what happened there in that experience was that I realized that in research, I would have opportunities to work on problems using methods that other people may never have thought about before. And there was just something about that that just really got me excited. The opportunity to do something new and to have these open-ended sort of problems to solve around it that could potentially have impact on society. To me, that just really, there's something in me that just really resonates with that. And so later down the line, you know, as I was finishing up undergraduate, I was contemplating about whether to take a job or go to graduate school because I had job offers. And the thing that appealed to me most about going to graduate school was this opportunity to explore the unknown. And so at that point in time, I didn't have my sights set on becoming a professor. It was really more oriented at the research side of things and going deeper in regard to that. I wouldn't say that actually it was not until probably the year before I finished my PhD that I got a firmer sense within myself that I was really interested in the faculty route or career. And partially what solidified that interest for me was having an experience teaching. I applied for a fellowship in the mechanical engineering department, the Lambert Fellowship. I don't know if they still have it, but through that fellowship, I was basically the professor for a section of heat transfer, the undergraduate heat transfer course in mechanical engineering. And what I learned through that experience is that, well, not only do I like or enjoy the opportunity to do new things in research, I really like teaching. I like interacting with students and conveying knowledge and being a mentor to students to help, you know, translate what I know to them and also challenge them to be creative and think critically and even go beyond what I know. But even then, I have to say that you know, because my PhD advisor, Tim Fisher, had actually encouraged me to apply for faculty jobs while I was a PhD student. And I was somewhat hesitant to do that, specifically because I didn't feel like I had enough experience being a research manager. Because to some degree, when you switch from the role of a student to a professor, you take on a lot of new responsibilities that you may have very limited experience with in the past. One of which is, you know, transitioning from doing the research yourself to being an advisor of students who do the research and actually execute the tasks. And I didn't have a lot of experience doing that. I also didn't have a lot of experience with the proposal writing aspect. That is, when you're a professor, you know, unless you're in a very unique position where you're basically given a pot of money that you can do whatever you want with, which is quite uncommon, you are responsible to write proposals to fund the research that your group will do. And I didn't feel very confident about that. I actually questioned whether, boy, am I even able to do this? Is this something I would even find enjoyable? And fortunately for me, this postdoc opportunity at MIT ended up coming up, which I'm glad to share more about later. It wasn't, honestly, when I applied for faculty jobs the second time, which was really the most serious attempt that I made at it, that was a year and a half into my postdoc, and I was not absolutely convinced at that point in time that this is the career path that I wanted to take, even then. At that point in time, I felt sort of like, okay, God, I'm going to have my hands open to you, and I'm going to knock on the doors and see if a door opens. And I certainly, I think that this is a track that is appealing to me, and that I could bring strengths to and grow in. But I don't know for sure whether this is, ultimately what I'm going to do. So it's really a process of becoming, and a lot of uncertainty. You're dealing with a lot of things you've never seen before. And I can say today, however, that there's a lot about what I do that I really enjoy. And I can see how being a professor, it opens up to me opportunities that I can have in very few other contexts of a career. So anyway, very long answer.
Yeah, it's a really inspiring story. I think many of us have experienced similar things, the frustrations when we're doing research or when we're like running towards our goals. So I think many of us hasn't expect you to have going through such kind of frustration as we do.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I didn't realize that you can have the same time even when you're in an undergraduate. I thought people who finally got a faculty job are always those who did pretty well in undergraduate and published all the papers in PhD, and then very competitive, good at talking, writing proposals, and finally get a job. So, but as you may see, many people are curious about changing the world or become a scientist when they're very young. But as they grow up, they meet a lot of difficulties when they're learning math or learning physics, or even when they're doing like research. So they kind of like self-doubting about whether this is a nice way. Is because sometimes the interest, our internal motivation does not match with our gift. So how do you realize that this is something that you can work hard and then you can get it, or this is actually a sign of closing the door?
That's a good question. It's a hard question. So I'll try my best to answer it directly, but I will probably go off track a little bit, I imagine. What first comes to mind when you ask that question is really another question in my mind. And that is, in light of the uncertainty about what you will actually be able to do ultimately as a career, what is the specific role that you will take in light of that uncertainty, because we really don't know. Like, you can't, even those people who really do, have it planned out, they don't know for sure what's going to happen. They might say they do, but there are things that are out of their control. So, but considering that there is that uncertainty there, well, what kind of perspective should I have on life? What kind of perspective should I have on my work? And, throughout my academic education and also the career that I've now been in for about 10 years since my postdoc started, one thing that I have learned that I think has been really valuable for me throughout is to continue to be diligent in attempting to learn and to extract from my experiences as much as I can learn, right? To see those experiences that I'm having right now as an opportunity to grow myself and to adjust accordingly, to be flexible in a way, but also teachable, to not be so, I don't think there's really a place for saying, unless you really know that you don't want to go into an area for one reason or another, having open hands and saying, okay, I want to learn and I want to go deep in my understanding. My sense is that will serve you throughout your entire career. Wherever you end up, go deep and take advantage of those failures even that come your way. You know, I will tell you, even if you get into a faculty job, which, you know, there's a number of students on this call, and maybe you're aspiring to that, maybe later on you find yourself in that position later. You may ask the question of yourself, even while you're in it, can I do this? I think this is a natural question to ask. I felt so many times in this job, like, wow, there's no way I can do this. I have no experience with this aspect. I have not been successful with this aspect as yet. How do I move forward? And I would feel stuck, overwhelmed and stuck. And the thing that I often find myself coming back to is, okay, let's take some baby steps, so to speak, to act on what I do understand in the moment and attempt to keep moving forward. Attempt to, you know, maintain positive advance in my life, in my job, and you know, there's something that I've learned of over the past few years that is a concept which I found pretty helpful, and I think it's getting more traction in the academic circles, and it's this idea of there being something called a growth mindset versus something called a fixed mindset. And it's some ideas that come from a psychologist. I can find the book and give you all a link later if you're interested in reading it. It's by Carol Dweck. She's a psychologist. And the distinction between these two mindsets actually has to do with how you perceive failure. When you fail at something, do you perceive that failure as an assessment of your innate value and ability, or do you perceive it as an opportunity to grow? And in general, this growth mindset is a much more healthy way to do things in your life and in your work, because you take those things that, yes, they may feel awful in the moment, and you say, no, I'm going to learn from it. This is not just, it's not an assessment of who I am. Who I am is actually something much deeper than that thing I just failed in. And I can grow. I can grow. It might take some time, just like it takes time for plants to grow. But I can grow. So anyway, I think I got off track with your question, but I was expecting that. So
yeah. Usually when you talk, there are more questions coming to my mind. So, you know, like at the very beginning of our coffee hour, we were talking to Professor Appenzeller, and he points out that like for smart students who end up like working in Purdue, they're always like getting good great grades in their past life easily. So they feel like the smart children are kind of not very strong at dealing with failures because there are not many failures in their past life. So it's much more easily for this student to get stuck in their research because there are so many uncertainties and people can get frustrated very easily.
Yeah.
But again, I agree with you that it will be nice if when we meet a frustration, when we are depressed, we change our mind to learn from it, but sometimes it's just so painful and some people just get stuck in those emotions. So how do you manage yourself to look at the upside and keep moving instead of feeling pity and feeling self-destroying?
Yeah. So I in seeing some of the questions that you wrote beforehand, I realized, you know what, I have an opportunity to be very real with these students, and I hope that in me sharing that this really does help you all. It actually helps me to be able to share it. In my life at different times, I have actually had some very, very low points. This is not public information in every regard, but I'm happy to share it and make it public. But when I was starting out an assistant professor in the position I'm in now, during the first year that I was in this job, I felt very inadequate in what I was doing. I felt like, wow, I don't have the experience here. I'm faced with these problems and these failures, and I don't know how to move forward. And in reality, I was making some progress in different ways, but my mindset was very negative as far as my assessment of myself. And this got so bad that at the end of my first year as an assistant professor, I found myself on my couch in my apartment on a Sunday morning contemplating suicide. And I share this again because I think it can have impact. I want it to have positive impact in people's lives. And I'm thankful that I didn't do anything. I certainly had ideation of that kind of thing. And I ended up going into the hospital even. And a lot of things happened after that, including me getting therapy from a very good counselor who I could speak to and learn about strategies to cope with stress and anxiety, and also to help me see my job, I think, from a healthy perspective. You mentioned about how Professor Appenzeller said that, the challenge with students who have had a lot of success academically in the classroom is that they're not good at dealing with failure. Well, I think that for me, at least, there are some very clear reasons for that. I think because I had so much success, my identity, my personal identity in a lot of ways was wrapped up in that success. I was used to being considered the smart guy, all of that. And then when there are arrows that come in your life where those sort of notions really don't hold up anymore because you've had failure or something, if your identity's wrapped up in that, then you feel worthless when you lose it. And I had to realize that, what? This is not all who I am. I am so much more. And, being a Christian, being a believer in God, I believe, as the Bible teaches, actually, that we're made in God's image. And that because of that, we have value in his eyes. And so my bedrock, the foundation that has kept me steady and moving forward is God. And, for those here who maybe don't have that, I just encourage you. It is really a great thing to desire to use the abilities that you have, the mind that you have to help people and to solve problems that ultimately lead to societal benefit and all of that. But even with all of that, that is not who you are. That is not all that you are as a human. You are so much more. And so you gotta have a strong foundation, I think, and aside even from your technical things that you do, and an understanding that you are more. You're more than that. But I think I forgot actually what the question was.
It's totally fine. I forgot what I asked as well, but I think all of us appreciate what you shared with us. I think it helps us a lot. I know a lot of people are frustrated or having depressions in their research, which is pretty common. But usually when we are talking with successful people, they will tell us that you need to have a determination. You need to be determined about your goal and keep going. And those can give you the grade and make you very diligent in working. But I guess you give us a different answer.
Well, I just to speak to that, and I appreciate you mentioning that. I cannot emphasize how important diligence is. You have to stay on the path, and not. That doesn't mean that along the way you don't necessarily question. Okay, is the original approach that I was using, does that need to be revised? Do I need to pivot in some way? And that is very healthy to do. But at the same time, once you to decide to do something, you need to follow through. You have to follow through. And even in the challenges that I've experienced, that's another principle that I've had to hold to is, okay, even though I don't have confidence right now, for instance, to put a proposal together that I think is going to be funded, because the average rate at which proposals are funded from the National Science Foundation is on the order of 15%. So that means like one in six proposals is funded on average. You know what? I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do it not only because I hope to get the funding, but because I need to learn this. Well, that's one thing that I learned in the proposal writing process, which I had a little bit of experience with before I started this job. I had to realize that, you know what, me writing proposals, I'm not just doing this so that I can get money right now. I do ultimately need to get to a level where I can start to bring in funds so that I can sustain the research that my group is doing. But even more than that, especially when you're starting out as an assistant professor, writing proposals and getting them submitted to an agency that reviews them, where you will then get the reviews back, that is actually one of the best mechanisms for you to learn how to write a proposal, is to get that feedback from the funding agency and the community of people that they solicit to give the feedback. And even beyond the money aspect of it, there are things that I have learned even over the past couple years, even the past 1 year, by talking to program managers at funding agencies about not just how to write a proposal, but about science. I had last year during the pandemic period, I reached out to a program manager at the Department of Energy because I wanted to write a proposal to his program and be successful at it. And he really took me under his wing. And he said, okay, you send me a white paper with your idea, and I'll read it, and then we'll meet, and I'll give you some feedback. And I realized after that conversation with him that there was something missing, and he encouraged me, just put a document together with some hypotheses and research questions, and let's discuss over that. And in the process of a subsequent conversation with him in that regard, I realized that, wow, I can shift how I'm thinking about doing my research, potentially not just to get money, but to make it more impactful and actually much more interesting. And I only learned that because the program manager challenged me to think differently. He gave me a candid sort of assessment of what my hypotheses and my research questions were. And if I would not have had that, there aren't colleagues in my department that are going to tell me what to do, right? When you become a professor, some people would describe it like you're the CEO of your own startup company in a way, only, you're not aimed at making products, you're aimed at, writing papers and making an impact in science and everything. And so you got to make executive decisions. And certainly there's risk associated with all that, but you do your best, and you try to follow your nose, so to speak, with the leads that come up. And having having a continual desire to learn and grow will be such an asset to you if you let that drive you in this position, and also having an openness to new ideas. So anyway, I'll stop there with that question. I'll look back at the YouTube video and I think I'm going to realize that I didn't directly answer any of the questions that you asked.
It's fine. That's why we call it a conversation, not a Q&A.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I know like it has been a long time, like you grow and you see the opportunities and grow again and finally send you to where you are now. And actually, as we all experience, actually, as we grow older and older, we're taking more and more responsibilities and the tasks are more and more difficult, not the other way around. But from the other side, I can see you really prepare yourself very well. Like in your undergraduate, you start to write proposal, and when you are doing your PhD, you even try to do the Lambert teaching fellow and try to teaching. So I think all these things help you to get prepared about your future career. And notice that you kind of like slightly changed your like topics since undergrad. I think at the very beginning, you're kind of working on solid physics, some heat transfer in nanoscale. And then I think it's from MIT when you're in material science, you start to work on flow batteries and then ion transport and now desalination. So how does this transition happen?
That's a great question. I think I heard somebody speak up in the background. I don't know if you had a question or not. My path technically has been a very different one. For my PhD, I was initially motivated by this problem of storing hydrogen on board fuel cell vehicles, and to a large extent, that was sort of motivation that was inherited from undergraduate things that I had done with Tim Fisher, but the technical focus was different. In my PhD, but during that PhD time, I spent a lot of time developing models to predict the microstructure of heterogeneous metal hydride powders that would have to conduct heat through them in order to store hydrogen on board a fuel cell vehicle. So I was really focused on understanding heat transfer in these heterogeneous materials, et cetera. But along the way, I realized after meeting someone who is now a professor in mechanical engineering at Purdue, Partha Mukherjee, who's a friend. I met him when he gave a seminar at Purdue in mechanical engineering. At that point in time, he was at Oak Ridge National Lab. That was 10 years ago. And Partha was speaking about work that he had done on fuel cells, et cetera. And basically, I had a meeting with him during that time. Another professor arranged a meeting with him for me to share about the work that I did in these powders. And it turns out that lithium-ion batteries have a heterogeneous microstructure to them. They are not homogeneous materials. The material that store lithium ions inside a battery are actually nanoscopic particles, often depending on what the material is made out of, and those are integrated into a porous electrode structure that also has conductive additives in it and binder, and of course electrolyte that fills the pore space. So I had made these tools in the main part of my PhD, basically to predict microstructure of particulate systems that are dense, and ended up starting a collaboration with who is now Professor Mukherjee in ME at Purdue to model microstructure of batteries. And that, in addition, got me connected with concepts like ion transport phenomena, et cetera, which is an integral part of how batteries function. And then we got a paper out on that stuff. I only had one paper related to electrochemistry in my PhD. It was the one with Partha. And however, I realized this is an area which I really think is interesting. And I went to a meeting, a conference of the Electrochemical Society in Boston. And in the course of that conference, I met someone in a symposium that I was presenting in, who was a postdoc at MIT, who was doing some contemporary work. And after that meeting, I followed up with him, and I was sharing more about my own work, sharing some data even, and we developed a little bit of a working relationship in that regard, and it was nice. But it wasn't until I actually defended my PhD that I started thinking seriously about my postdoc and what I might do. I remember it was in March of 2012. And I was really uncertain for a while about, okay, where am I going to go? I don't even know of any opportunities necessarily. I started reaching out to some authors that I knew the names of from the literature, in the contemporary literature to mine on granular materials. And then I realized, you know what, I know this guy from MIT, Dan Cogswell is his name. Why don't I email him and see if his postdoc advisor or PhD advisor has any need for another postdoc? And so I did that, and I'm grateful that he was willing to share my name with those people, which include a guy named Martin Bazant in chemical engineering at MIT, and also Craig Carter, who's in materials. And basically, Dan connecting me with them helped me find opportunities, and I interviewed out there, and the rest is history, I guess. That experience there at MIT was a great one. I think it challenged me in a lot of ways. It gave me a concrete experience in the electrochemistry area, and it caused me to start thinking creatively about how I can apply what technical knowledge I have to do new things in that area. I don't know, I realized, I think the ultimate question was about, well, how did you end up in electrochemical stuff? It was really a sequence. And now, even though I had just the 2 years of that postdoc experience, now almost everything that my group does is electrochemical. There's lots of other details in there too that happened during my PhD that helped me to set me up for success. Also, I had experiences at an Indian institute in Bangalore, going on sabbatical with Tim Fisher there. And in addition to doing granular material stuff there, I got to do some applied physics type modeling with density functional theory and atomistic modeling, which my group is even building on today. And that was not something that technically even went into my PhD thesis. So I guess the learning or takeaway there is that even these sort of tangential experiences that you can have later on down the line, they can give you some piece of knowledge that can enable you to step into an area that you didn't have a lot of experience with in the past. So
Yeah,
anyway,
that's another open-minded answer. So I think we are approaching the end of interview. So I would like to invite the audience to post questions in the chat. Okay, I will continue my question here. So then you finish your postdoc in MIT. I know it's the competition between young faculties to get a job. It's very intense. So what do you think the good characteristic of you that sent you to get a nice faculty job?
That's a good question. Well, I'll tell you firstly, in answering that question, I do think I've been fortunate enough to have some experiences and knowledge and creativity that have set me up I think, to set me apart in some ways. But when I come in daily to this job right now, if you were to ask me, well, what do you think about, if you're thinking about why are you here, do you think about why you're here because you deserve it? Actually, the kind of bedrock that I stand on is that, okay, I'm here by God's grace. That's why I'm here. That's actually the thing that helps me the most, is to remember that. Helps me to deal with the failures that come my way and just to see it in a positive light. But, you know, one thing that a person in the audience at my PhD defense ended up telling me, or either told me or told my advisor afterward, and then he told me, was Ashraf Alam from electrical engineering. I think he's also part of Birck. Professor Alam made a comment to Professor Fisher that he was impressed with the fact that I was able, in my defense, to acknowledge the limitations of my work and not attempt to argue that everything about my work was perfect, but instead to identify that there are very specific limitations, right? With any kind of modeling or analysis that we do as engineers, it is always going to be simplified to some degree relative to reality. And so I don't know. I feel like that is a strength that I have. I feel compelled, actually, in my mind, to be conscious of what I'm assuming and where are these kind of assumptions that I'm making valid. I do think also that and this is kind of along a similar line of thinking, when you talk about your work, I think it's important for you to have a broader perspective of the potential implications of it than just the immediate implications that initially motivated your work, right? I think that's part of it. Actually, a potentially very productive scientific mindset is seeing connections between multiple areas because they have shared physics or some type of analogous concept of a principle or something. And that can actually allow you to bridge different areas that may seem quite disparate, actually. So I think that's something that I try to do. I will say, sometimes when I try to do that, it actually feels like, wow, this is really hard. I wish I didn't try to do this all the time. So, you know, you'll find in your career, especially as you move on, at different points in time, you have to wear different hats. So to speak, and think, you have to be quite active, actually, to think in different ways about different aspects. And my sense is that to know when to put a certain hat on is really an aspect of having wisdom. It's something that you have to learn along the way, usually by failure.
It is.
So.
Yeah, let's have a look like the questions from the audience. So Swati asked, do you think the conversations regarding mental health is not really well emphasized in graduate school?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't really remember. I think what I will say, Swati, is, you know, my sense is that there is, not just in grad school, in our society in general, I think there's stigma around mental health issues, and, you know, people can say offhanded things about that. And I don't think that necessarily the graduate school or even undergraduate school environment is absent of those things. I think that there's not necessarily a consciousness there, just like there's not necessarily a consciousness in the world, broadly speaking. I think though, as an advisor, when I even though I've described a lot of my experiences as a student and as a faculty member now, when I, as an advisor, think about my role with my students and their mental health, I feel like I need to be conscious of them as people, not just as workers. And I think that's important. And I think we can make improvements in that regard. I think the challenge, however, in the academic environment, particularly for young faculty, is that there is a lot of pressure on you as a researcher to produce, and you depend on your students a lot. And sometimes I think that can translate to toxic interactions with students, which is not good at all.
Yeah.
That's bad, and if you start to see stuff like that happening, I think you need to ask for help. If your advisor is not able to walk through that with you, then you certainly got to bring help on board.
Yeah, we got another question about your teaching fellowship. So, how do you evaluate the benefit of that teaching fellowship in getting your job?
Oh, I think it actually helped a lot. The fact that I had teaching experience, I don't know. I think it was good. I think it was good. I have never actually debriefed with the faculty recruiting committee that ended up hiring me. So I don't really know. I don't really know, what specifics they discussed about my case. But I will say, at research universities like the University of Illinois and Purdue, professors in general are expected to perform with respect to three different pillars, as it's called: teaching, research, and service. And at research universities like ours, especially for assistant professors, the emphasis is put on research. So when the faculty recruiting committees are looking at applications, I am almost sure that the greatest amount of weight is placed on the research aspect, because that's what ultimately they want to see an assistant professor perform in. Now, that doesn't mean, when you're an assistant professor, that you can be a terrible teacher. But often, I've heard it said that, if you're getting on the list of most of teachers ranked as excellent every semester, but your research as an assistant professor is not that great, that better or really good teaching is not necessarily going to help you get over the bar with regard to tenure. Not at least, at the assistant professor level. So I hope that gives some perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I think we are running out of our time.
Yeah.
My last question, I would like to ask you if you can give us some suggestions that our graduate students should specifically pay attention to and practice when we are aiming for a faculty job. What do you think are the good preparations for us we can do now?
That's a good question. Well, actually, I would say go deep with your research, and really get everything out of your research that you can, and do it well, do it excellently. I believe that is an adverb, excellently. And I say that because, even though I didn't say, oh, make a beautiful presentation of your research, doing your research extremely well, and appreciating its broader significance, etc., that is going to help you not only to get the job, but to actually do it and enjoy it. So that would be my foremost suggestion. Really go deep with the research, and be open to new opportunities. Be creative too. Be rigorous.
I see.
Also.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much for sharing your such personal experience with us and encourage us, inspire us in our graduate studies. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and thank you again. Thank you for everybody who attended, and take care.